By 2020, millennials will make up 46% of the U.S. workforce. And yes, it's becoming increasingly important to try and keep your best performing baby boomers on board longer in order to avoid a skill gap. But while many of us are busy finding new ways to attract, hire, and retain both of these generations, it's Generation Z that's slowly but surely entering the workforce. Hi, my name is Katie, podcasting from the Harvard office in New York, and this is Recruitment on the Go.
Stand clear of the closing doors, please.
Generation who, you say? In today's episode, we're talking about Generation Z, also referred to as digital natives and the I generation. This is the batch that comes after Generation Y, the notorious millennials. While the latter was born somewhere between the early 80s and mid-90s, Generation Z starts around 96 till about 2012. If you quickly do the math, this means that they are currently between 7 and 23 years old. It also means that Generation Z is making its first steps into the workforce, albeit for now, mostly interning or entry-level positions. As more and more digital natives are entering the workforce, it's eminent to think about how you can best attract them. In this episode, we'll dive into the developments that shape Generation Z. We'll also take a look at how this translates into their needs in the workplace by giving you 7 tips for hiring Generation Z employees. Let's get started. First things first, let's brush up on our Gen Z knowledge. Let's start by taking a look at some of the technological developments that took place during the time they were born, and there are plenty of them. Between 1996 and 2012, most of us went from our first calling and texting only mobile phone to a smartphone that allowed us to virtually manage all aspects of our social life. With the rise of the smartphone came the explosion of apps. With these, you could identify songs, play games, chat, date, and everything in between. Wi-Fi. It almost seems unthinkable now, but there was a time when we went through life completely Wi-Fi free. It wasn't until 1997 that wireless internet was first released to consumers, and it took a few more years for the technology to become widespread. Cloud computing, another big one. Gone are the days of having to save documents on floppy disks. Remember those? Hard drives or massive company servers? For Generation Z, saving their photos, music, and videos in the cloud is just as normal as brushing their teeth. The World Wide Web, probably the godfather among the technological developments that have shaped the world into what it is today, and one that only really took off from the late 90s onwards. As this is only a small sample of the countless technological advancements we've seen over the past 20 years, it's no surprise that Gen Z is often being described as the ones who were born with a smartphone in their hands. So what does this all mean for you as a recruiter looking to attract this generation? Based on what we've just mentioned, there are a few things we can say about Generation Z in terms of their work-related expectations. 1, they are tech savvy. This is something the term digital natives implies. Like we said, these are the people who were pretty much born with a smartphone in their hands and who learned how to say Wi-Fi before grandpa. The fact that Generation Z doesn't know a world without digital devices, the internet, or social media means that they know perfectly well how to navigate this kind of technology. As a result, they use it for virtually every aspect of their lives, and they expect nothing less from their workplace. For Generation Z, company systems that are hosted in the cloud and accessible from anywhere on any device are nothing special. The same goes for video calls. Why make an impersonal, old-fashioned phone call when you can use FaceTime, Zoom, Hangouts, and a ton of other video call applications to look the other person in the eye? These are just 2 of the many examples of technological applications that are perceived as the norm by Generation Z, but not necessarily yet by the organizations that recruit them. 2, they know their weaknesses. A study held among 4,000 Generation Z members showed that 37% of them are concerned about their ability to communicate and maintain strong interpersonal relationships. Ironically, they fear that technology is negatively affecting this. From an employer perspective, it's important to keep this in mind when you think about a personalized L&D program for your Gen Z workers. Rather than focusing on the tech side of their skills, you may want to put the emphasis on boosting their communication skills, for example. 3. They are serious. Many digital natives still vividly remember the financial crash of 2008. A lot of them saw what happened to their parents or grandparents. This is one of the reasons why Generation Z, unlike millennials, is quite risk-averse. They attach importance to the fact that the job that they're doing has a certain purpose, but they also find it equally as important that it gives them a level of security. Now that we have an understanding of Generation Z characteristics in the workplace, here are our 7 tips for hiring them. Number 1, they are one with their smartphones. Unsurprisingly perhaps, but for Gen Z, their smartphone is their preferred device by far. As an organization looking to hire these digital natives, you want to make use of this. A mobile recruitment strategy is the minimum you need. As they organize their entire lives with their mobile phone, digital natives look for jobs on their phones too. We could talk for hours about mobile recruiting, but there are a few elements to keep in mind. Avoid too much text. Keep your job description short and sweet, bearing in mind the mobile format of your job page. Make sure it's easy for people to apply. If you ask candidates to upload documents, make sure the upload function works well and fast. Don't ask for unnecessary information that lengthens the application process and risk losing candidates before they've reached the end. Include videos. This can be to show applicants a short glimpse of your office or an employee testimonial, for example. You can ask your candidates to record a 1-minute video to introduce themselves and add a file to their application. Number 2, adapt to their short attention span. If you're hiring Generation Z employees, it's important to be aware of the relatively short attention span. Gen Z is very video-oriented, so think about how you can make this work for you. If, for example, many of your potential candidates use Instagram, you can create some engaging content via stories, the temporary content function on Instagram, rather than simply posting a photo. Keep your candidates informed and engaged during the application process. This is always important, no matter what generation your applicants are from, but even more so with digital natives who have a short attention span. Adapt your onboarding process. Making them read heaps of company documents isn't going to cut it for Gen Z. If you've got information they absolutely have to go through during their onboarding, try to put it in a different format. Yes, video could be a good alternative. The last thing you want is to lose their attention before they've even started. Number 3, it's all about video. In case we failed to make our point about Generation Z and all things video, this is a generation that loves video, probably the result of growing up with a camera in your pocket. Here's a quick overview of the parts of the hiring process that you could use videos for. Sourcing. For instance, when you're targeting Gen Z candidates, show them behind-the-scenes videos from your company on social media. Attracting. By asking applicants to send you a short video of themselves, or perhaps only asking them to send a video for an even quicker application. Pre-selection. When you're hiring Generation Z employees and you use a pre-employment assessment tool, you need to include videos. It's the perfect opportunity to show your candidates the office, the job, and various on-the-job scenarios, the company culture, and of course the potential future colleagues. Onboarding. We already said it. Where possible, use video rather than text during your Gen Z onboarding. Number 4, don't forget about health and wellness. Employee health and wellness is becoming an increasingly important topic. As people's awareness about healthy lifestyles, including exercise, food, and mental health grows, so does the importance they attach it to at work. For Gen Z, a company's health and wellness program, if any, is a factor they take into account when they're choosing a place to work. However, this doesn't mean that you need a massive budget or a very elaborate program. Number 5, think about growth. In this regard, Gen Z isn't very different from their predecessors. When you're hiring them, you need to have a plan. This means they'll expect you to give them some sort of future projection that involves their professional and personal growth within your organization. Now, this doesn't mean you need to have a detailed 5-year plan, of course, but you may want to think about the following elements. What's your company's L&D program like for this kind of role? What kind of positions do people generally evolve into after they've been with a company for a few years? What's your organization's internal hiring policy like? Can people easily move from one department to another if they want to? Number 6, independence and ownership. What Gen Z may lack in communication and interpersonal skills, they make up for in terms of independence. This is a generation that is able to find a YouTube guide for virtually any kind of tech-related issue. As such, Z candidates are much more self-sufficient than many of their predecessors. They are able to assess a situation independently, and if they do need assistance, they'll find it online via YouTube, help forums, and other learning resources. While they may be aware of their own weaknesses, digital natives also know their strengths. They value their independence and are willing to take ownership of projects so that they can show people what they're capable of. As an employer looking to hire Generation Z employees, it's good to keep this desire for independence in mind. Unlike millennials, for example, Gen Z isn't necessarily very keen on an open space, but likes to work alone instead. Number 7, Gen Z was born to multitask. You know how they say it's impossible to do more than one thing at a time? Well, that was probably someone who hadn't met a digital native yet. More so than any other generation before them, Gen Z employees are used to a constant influx of notifications. For them, switching between email, various apps, and reminders comes naturally. While this is probably the reason they have a super short attention span, it also makes them seriously good at multitaskers. This is something to keep in mind when you're hiring Gen Z, especially if you're recruiting for a role that requires long periods of deep concentration on a certain task. You want to make sure that you've been very clear on that point. Alright, there you have it. 7 tips for hiring Generation Z employees. Of course, there's a lot more to be said about this generation that is now entering the global workforce. And sure, not all digital natives are the same, so not all of these tips will apply to everyone. If there's one thing to take away from this episode, however, it's that you should always adapt your recruitment strategy to the people you want to get on board. Thanks for joining today's episode. If you want to learn more about everything and anything recruitment related, please check out our blog at harvard.com/blog and subscribe to our podcast. See you next time.